Are you guys ready to install the Titan Ridge Thunderbolt 3 add-in card? We're working with the Gigabyte TRX40 Designare motherboard, and we're going to do the install today. Hope you'll join us. Hello everybody, welcome to Build or Buy. Today, we're going to be installing the Titan Ridge Thunderbolt 3 card in the Gigabyte TRX40 Designare motherboard. We've been eager to do this for quite some time, so this should be pretty interesting. What we want to do, we'll take a look at the product. We're going to talk a little bit about the technology. We're also going to take a look at the requirements, and then we're going to do an installation. Now, this won't be just a typical installation. We'll do the simple installation first, but we're going to do a second installation, what I'm going to call kind of a tinkering installation. In other words, okay, this motherboard supports it, and out of all the TRX40 motherboards, there's only one that supports this card, and that's the TRX40 Designare from Gigabyte. What we want to do is that install. We'll do the BIOS, take a look at that. We'll do the operating system, take a look at that. But as we look at the two cards and compare what's in this box versus what's in the retail box, what I want to know is the firmware the same? Because when you do the install, you're actually doing two things. One, you do the driver install, and two, there's a firmware update. Now, there's typically been a README file that we could read that would tell us about what was going on, because in the past, it was always, for this version, do it this way, and for this version, do it that way. So we're going to check that README file and see what it says about the proper way to do this. What do I mean by that? Do you have a device connected or not on the end of this? Now, some months ago, I wasn't able to help the individual, and I was sorry because we were remodeling, but he put one of these in his system, everything was working fine. Then he updated the firmware. It quit working. I'm not sure what firmware he had, but I was very specific last time we did this on the X399 about your firmware. So I want to take a look and see what firmware is in here, and I want to compare it to the other card and see what the firmware is that's on that card. We'll take a look and see, because this is something I'm not sure you want to go back to Gigabyte's website and update. In other words, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So let's get this out of the box. We're going to go overhead and do a comparison. Now, first things first, these should be the same cards, but what we want to know is as we look at this, we're going to compare the connections. As we look at the technology, what's required, what this can do, because what's curious is not only do we have the same firmware, which we'll find out when we get into Windows, I want to know what the revision is on the PCB board that's in the box. So let's go overhead. We'll set this one aside. Let's open the main box, and we have one I/O card left, and that's the Titan Ridge. Of course, we still got cables left in here to work with, and that's something else we need to talk about as well, what's required. Because it's kind of curious, there's three things that Thunderbolt is supposed to do, and this is Thunderbolt 3. And when we'll talk about it as we look at the connections and compare the two cards, so try to keep it simple. There's a lot of information. Now, one thing we won't cover with this video is a speed comparison. We'll say that for another video. Another thing we're going to do, this is going to be a simple install with one device, which will be connectivity for data. I'll get more into that a little bit later, but the reason for that, we have three audio interfaces still to install. One is USB, and two are going to be Thunderbolt 3. Each one gets a video separate from this. We'll set that aside. There are some cables in there that we may need a little bit later, but right now we're going to look at this card and we're going to compare, and we'll talk about the two as we travel down this path. We have a simplified bag. It's an anti-static bag, but not this is like the old style anti-static bags. So we're going to get this out. We've got a serial number on the back, and yeah, we can see what the PCB version is. So let's see what we got in this box. See the difference in the anti-static bag? Now, that's a real anti-static bag. We'll just set that aside for the moment. So examining from the front, as we read the labels, the two look the same, and this looks like it has a piece of plastic that we should pull off, which means this one probably does too. Yeah, there's a piece of plastic film on both of these that needs to be pulled off. Let's see how close we can get and see if we can see that PCB on there. These look like the same cards, all right. I see PCIe 4X-GF1. I've got the same thing down here. PCIe 4X-GF1. Let's see on the back. This one at the top came with the motherboard. This is the one that's in a separate bag, separate box. Only difference I see is this one has a serial number on it. This one does not. But we have a part number here. Let's turn these around and take a look at them. Let's see what we've got. Now, the one that came with the motherboard, this is 1C, and this one is 1B. So this is a newer card, which is going to tell us we have a different firmware in here. So we sure want to pay attention to the driver install, because 1C versus 1B, I wonder what the difference is. I won't even go through the rest of the numbers. Those are different. So far, that's the only thing I see different. We're going to go around the edge of the card now and compare the connections. That should be the same, but I just want to know. Anybody else who's curious about it, we'll find out together. Okay, looking at the connections that come out the back, that's the same. The one on top comes with a motherboard. They both have a DisplayPort connection. They both have 2 Thunderbolt ports on them, and they both have display N1 and display N2. Now, at one time, documentation said that these were labeled wrong. We'll find out. I don't expect that to be the case, because what I expect to be, and this brings up an interesting point, Thunderbolt 3 does 3 things. One, you route video through it, and that's correct. You route video through it. Video doesn't come out it unless video goes into it. Number 2, you route power through it, which is, we'll get into that in a minute. And then number 3 is for data connectivity. The only one to me that makes sense is data connectivity. Why? Number 1, okay, I got a whiz-bang video card, whatever it is. Say I want to route video through it. Well, why don't you just plug that straight into the monitor? You know, if you got a 5K monitor, okay. Is it on Intel's approved list? Because if it's not, it's probably not going to work. So that's out the door. So why, again, would you route video through this? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So we're not going to do that. Number 2 would be to route power. Okay. Say you want to route power through it. From the experience we had with USB, if you plugged in an audio interface into USB and sometimes you get a little zipper noise or that little bit of a buzz or that hum in the studio and you're like, where's that coming from? I'm not sure if it's crickets or bees or what it is. That's where it was coming from. Now, the circuitry is supposed to be better. I'll give you that. Our suggestion would be no power coming through this thing to an audio interface. Your audio interface needs to have a separate wall wart. Now, for those of you on laptops that are doing that, more power to you. If you don't have noise, fantastic. But I'm just saying, as an experience from USB, that's where your problem was. Don't get a USB audio interface that does power where data is supposed to go. You're just asking for trouble. Same philosophy applies. I'm not convinced. I mean, why do we do revisions on motherboards? That's one of the number 1 causes, because you get zipper noise on the motherboard because of the way those traces are done. It's just, keep it simple. The only thing that makes sense to me is number 3. So data transfer. So the simple install we're going to do is we'll do one install by the book with BIOS support and with motherboard support. And then we'll do another install so we can answer the question, will this work on my motherboard based on the requirements? What do you have to have? One 16-lane slot. One 16-lane slot? Not exactly. All you got to have is one 4-lane slot. So that'll work in a lot of computers. It's not like trying to stick in the M.2 card. That had to have a full 16-lane slot bifurcated. This only needs 4 lanes. Now, the next issue. Because we're on a beta BIOS, Gigabyte is having some difficulty with figuring out lane assignments. So theoretically, we should be able to put this card in either one of the 2 8-lane slots. Remember, we have 2 16-lane slots and 2 8-lane slots. We can use one 8-lane slot. Theoretically, we should have then another 8-lane slot left over. Well, we have another slot left over, but we don't have 8 lanes. We don't even have 4 lanes on it until I get that issue solved. So what we're going to do is install. We'll try both slots. One slot it will work on. The other slot it will not work on. Why? Lane assignments. Until Gigabyte gets that BIOS right, we're going to have to be very particular, and that's why we're building this foundation and being very methodical, like steps on a ladder as we go up, so we know how far we can go without falling and having to start all over. Because if something goes wrong, you don't want to have to break everything down, because that's always what you got to do. When something goes wrong, you have to break it down and start over. So we're trying to eliminate that, and we want to keep it simple. That's why we're going through this very methodically. So as we look at the connections on the card, we know what we've got to deal with. And for what we're going to do, we're only going to be using one of these ports for device connectivity. We're not going to be routing video through it, which will go in through here and out through here if it works according to the labels. Now, we can give it a shot, but I'm just saying. Now, as far as what's on the back side, I'll turn these around. And again, the card on top. Okay, on the back end, we've got 2 power taps. If we want to route power through this card, there's 2 taps. And we have 2 other connectors here. One of these is for USB 2 header, and this one is for the special cable for the Thunderbolt 3 header, which goes on the motherboard, which is actually the THB_C header. Documentation on some of this stuff has been really, really sparse. And when you're trying to find out information, what you'll get from both vendors is a lot of this. I hear what Gigabyte says, and I hear what Intel says. But here we are in the middle trying to figure and sort all that out. We just want this thing to work. So our goal here is to keep it simple, and we're going to make it work, and we're going to show you what we did. 1, 2, 3. Pretty cool. So both cards function the same. Right now we know that there's probably a different firmware on each one. And we know that the only difference was the serial number and the part number. And the one with the serial number is the one that's in a separate bag. So we're going to put that one up. But we are going to install it later because I want to check and see how it installs. Now, for those of you that have watched the video, I would strongly encourage you, or if you have not, to see the one we talked about installing Windows, about getting all your drivers current, because we don't want to have any errors, and those drivers being current is extremely important for this to work, for it to work right, for it to function properly, or else we'll get goofy things happening. So this is the card. We're going to get the computer up. Okay, now the next thing we want to do, we're going to get this card installed. We're going to look at the 2 slots that we have. We're probably going to have to go in the first 8-lane slot. That'll be the place to start. Now what's curious is the connector for the THB_C header, and I'll show you on the motherboard. If you've got the video card installed, everything's fine. But if you've got the M.2 card installed, well, guess what? That connector that you need is right underneath the end of that card. I'll show you. We'll take a look. Okay, we've disconnected one of the USB 3 headers, so we can tilt this up and show you that connection. What we've got to look at is right down there. That's where we need to connect. So for clarity's sake, I'm going to pull this card out. I'll pull this card out right here so we can see that connector more clearly. Now we're going to need some of our cables. I like to keep all the cables in place. I don't like to get them out until I'm ready for them, so that way I can find them. And when I do get them out, I pull all that stuff out, and eventually I put it in a little baggie. Okay, to fully make everything functional, there's actually 4 cables we need. If you do everything, we've got 2 cables that route the video that we're not going to use. Those will be the ones that give you DisplayPort on one end and then Thunderbolt on the other. Then we have 1 cable for the USB header. It's a USB 2 header, and it's a double block, so 1 pin is blocked out, so you don't have to worry about that. This is the crucial cable we have to have. Now, by looking at that label, you would know what that is. But that is the cable that gives us the connection. I want to leave the wrapper intact so you can see the part number on it. Okay, this is the part number. 12CF1-1SHR01-21R. This little cable is double-ended on one end. That cable right there is crucial. That to get full support, if we didn't have that cable, that would be a deal breaker. Now, okay, got to make sure I'm grounded. Now the other cable that's extremely important is our USB header cable, but it's not a deal breaker. It is keyed with 1 pin blanked out. That we will need because we're going to occupy one of the USB headers. Got to have that for the signaling to make the plug and play work. And then these other 2 cables, like I said, these are for the routing of video. I just want to show you there's 4 cables required. So on this card, we have internally 4 connections, 2 power taps, 1 connection for the THB_C, and then the other connection for the USB 2. And then the other cables that are here, so 2 cables would be used. 2 cables would be used internally, and the other 2 cables would be used externally. We're only going to do the internal connections for these 2, for the Thunderbolt and for the USB. If we want to route power, we'll go ahead and do that because we're going to do a full simple install. So we're going to have power taps from the power supply to make that work. And that again is 2 6-pin power taps. So we can get a good view of this, we're going to have to pull that card out, set it aside. The things we do for you guys. I've been excited to get this done for quite some time. I'm sure you guys are too, because there is so much more stuff going on that we want to cover. But we have to get this done before we can go to the next step. Okay, we're going to get this card pulled out. We'll set that aside. Now you'll be able to see that connection. This is really interesting. The way the cable plugs in on this motherboard is a different connector. That's curious. When we did this on the X399, we put the cable on, but without BIOS support, this is kind of useless. It used the other part of the double-ended header. And that double-ended header is the one that's going to plug onto the motherboard. And the connection is right there. As you can see, it says THB_C. It's upside down. And of course, we've got the PEG connector. That's the PCI Express graphics. Well, with all the stuff we've got plugged in, we want to make sure we have plenty of power for the M.2 card and also for the Thunderbolt card. So right there is where that little thing is going to plug in. Wanted you guys to see that. Okay, so we have our special little cable, and I'm going to go ahead and plug that into the motherboard. After I get the card wired in, I'm going to need 2 power taps, 2 6-pin, and I have plenty of power left on this power supply. That's interesting. This was a pretty powerful power supply, and at the time I thought overkill, but with all the power leads we're going through, and I don't think we're doing a lot of stuff, we're going to have 2 power leads left, which is kind of curious. So, power leads. Change one thing, changes everything. So I need power leads that go, and those for this motherboard will be red, and I need 2. And 2 is what I have left. And I could have taken one of the power leads like on the video card and doubled them up, but I don't like doubling up stuff like that. I like separate cables, separate power leads. It's just my thing. So 2 6-pin taps, and these say PCI Express. So the clear end, of course, goes into the power supply. We're using Superflower. We'll put a link up, everything we talk about. And of course, the red end will go on the card. And for those that think the wiring is sloppy, you'll just have to get over that because we're building a computer and you want to go through the smoke test before you start wiring things down. This is still part of the smoke test. The computer works. We've got the I/O card working for the M.2. Now we're doing the next I/O card or add-in card, which of course is the Thunderbolt. So nothing gets tied down until everything is ready because you never know, you might have to pull something out. Might have to pull a power supply. And if we did, all those cables come out. So I'm just saying. So let's get these installed. We'll do power lead number 1. I got to tell you, so far I'm really impressed with this power supply. You know, having a Superflower power supply OEM is one thing, but having a Superflower power supply that's got their name on it, impressive. I like the way the thing works. I like the connections. I like the, and I'm not into LEDs and that kind of stuff, don't get me wrong, because it doesn't do anything for performance, but I kind of like it on a power supply. It makes it a little easier to see things, especially when you're, you know, messing with stuff. Don't ever try to plug those in hot. Make sure everything is off, but I just like the fact that once it's up and running, those are lit so I can look in there and see them. I like that. It's kind of cool. Okay, we have our 2 power leads. We'll let those sit. We got our card. Now, we have 2 16-lane slots, and then we have 2 8-lane slots. So we know this is occupied when we put the card back in, but while we have it out, we're going to go ahead with this on slot 1. Yes, right up next to the video card. And while we have it at this point, so we're going to need to plug in our cable. The single-ended version goes to the card. The double-ended version will go to the motherboard because of the connector. So we'll plug this in. A little easier to do right now than later. Then for signaling, we're going to need our USB 2 cable. So we'll get that out of the bag. And I will preserve the bag so that I can see the part number. Because what I'm curious, just because these parts are in the bag, does that mean people can order these parts? Should be able to, but that does not mean that you can. But we will look, and if we research and can find it, things happen. We'll put that part number up just in case. So now we're ready to hook this up. You'll notice one pin is blanked out, and you'll notice this is keyed, so you cannot mess this up. So we will plug that in to the USB header, the one that's blanked out. And this key, as you notice as I hold this up, you cannot get it backwards. So we're going to plug that in right there. See that one pin that's blanked out? So when I put that on, that'll go right in there. Done. Okay, so now all we need to do are the 2 power taps. Now I'm going to put this in with just these 2 cables. The 2 power taps I'll put in afterwards because I'm going to try to route those around, kind of get them out of the way so it looks a little neater. I've also got to determine which slot cover I take off. Yep, just want to make certain. Remove the slot cover right next to the video card. Hang on to all those parts. You never know, you might need them. Put them in a bag. Okay, 2 cables installed. All I have left are the power taps. Now, what you'll want to watch are the way those are keyed on those power taps because they too cannot be put in backwards. But I'm going to get the card in first. Okay, we have a 4-lane card in an 8-lane slot, just the way it is. I'm going to go ahead and secure it. And we're going in slot 1. I do not expect this to work in slot 2 right now until Gigabyte gets this BIOS issue figured out. I think they will, but until they do, we got to keep it simple. So what if I want to use that other slot? Good luck. Okay, cables to the back, power. So I'm going to need to stand this up because I've got to take the back off so I can route these power cables around and make this do what I want. So we're going to do that now. But while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and put this other card back in because once I stand it up, I get to monkeying around, I won't have to lay it back down. So we'll get this back in. Yeah, I was checking to see about reaching in for the power taps. I've got room. So this card will go right back in here. We'll have plenty of room to reach the power taps. Okay, both cards are secure. Now, anything I've removed that interacts with BIOS, such as that M.2 card, while I'm in the BIOS, I'm going to double check that card and make sure that I see those 4 drives. We went through all that in the last videos. We just want to make sure everything there is copacetic. Okay, now that we got our 2 cards in, we can stand this puppy up, pull the back off, start routing some cables. You know, it's time like this makes you appreciate the case you're in. This Corsair 750D is a nice case to work in. Okay, we're going to route our power cables out and around. We're going to bring them back through this side. Okay, 2 power taps. And we've got to come up to right about there. Holy moly, we got a whole bunch of other cables right there. We may have to go a little lower. That's where the drives come through. Okay, I'm going through the connection above, through the case, not where the drives go through, but the one up above. Because I may want to use those other SATA ports, and I really don't want to do this twice. So those 2 cables should route nicely through there. We'll see. But I will need to lay it back down and take a look at it. Okay, now here's our 2 power taps. and that puts us too short. So for those that like neatness, those are going to have to be routed, and they're going to have to show. There's no way we can get them hidden and be totally out of the way. There's just not a good place to bring those through the back side. Those cables are going to have to come straight in. I don't want to bring them in through the area where the SATA drives connect, the PEG connectors down there, and I want to be able to plug other SATA cables into that. So the only other thing we could do would be to route them on the inside edge, and that's a possibility. Let's take a look. Well, that was a good idea. I didn't expect those cables to be that short. I thought that was going to just be a brilliant idea. Normally I don't do any of this stuff routing cables, but I thought for those that are a little bit persnickety about things like that, thought we'd take the time. So, good idea, but. So back they go. So we got another option we're going to try. And I'm not really fond of doing that, or I could route them out through the back. So the cables need to go right here. And as we follow the line, I don't want to route them down through here because this is where I need access for the SATA cables. I could route them back over here through this area, or I could take the cables and route them around this way. Good question. If we route them this way, no, don't care for that at all. If we route them that way, I don't think they're long enough. They're just going to have to show. I'm not happy with trying to route them through this area where the data cables go. Now at the bottom of that, I do have the power tap for the PEG. Maybe I've got enough room down there for that. Let's flip it back up and see. I'm willing to try. So the PEG connector, let's bring that up. I may have too much tension on the PEG connector, and I may need to move that over some. But the PEG connector goes through the same sleeve where the SATA cables go, and there is room at the bottom of that for that. So let's try it. Out and around, back through the PEG. Yeah, I think that'll work. Right now, all the cables on the back are tied with twist ties because of things like this. You never know. You have to undo something. I had an experience where I probably went through 15 or 20 times popping those and cutting them and redoing them, and I said, not doing that anymore. I was wasting cable ties. So I think that's going to work. That'll get us our plugs that we need. And again, that leaves us 2 leads on the power supply, which is good to know. I could have piggybacked and used 1 lead for the video card, but again, like I said, I don't like to do that. And yes, I got my gloves on, got my strap, grounded, ESD. ESD is an insidious thing. Okay, let's pull that back down and see what we got. And I'm not sure we're going to get, we might. If that works, that'll work. Just had to pull them tight. Okay, go overhead. Okay, in this case, in this bottom area is where we pulled them through. This area is where the SATA cables come through, but in the very bottom where the PEG connector's at, that's where I'm bringing those in. Now, I could have brought the PEG connector through the large cavity, but I went ahead and brought it through this grommet, and I've also got these cables coming through that grommet as well. There's enough room for everybody. And I've pulled them a little bit tighter, and they will just reach. So we're going to be in business. So we need to get these connected. Pay attention to the connectors. We'll get these other 2 cables here out of the way. We'll start with the bottom one. And the key goes that way. I want to get that tilted where you can see. So that'll go in right there. Power tap is on. And now for the next one, make sure that's keyed correctly. Power tap is in. So that takes care of all the cables. As far as the 2 power cables, it looks pretty good in there. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, we've got the USB cable still to route. That may have to go direct because it's not long enough to route anywhere else. Yeah, it's going to have to go direct. So that goes over there. And then we have the one last connector. It's going to go back over here. Okay, now if we've got power connected, so the THB_C, I removed the M.2 card for clarity so you guys can see this. It's keyed, and it's a tiny little connector right there. Okay, this cable's double-ended. We're not using that connection. We're going to use this connection on this end. And notice the way that key goes toward the motherboard, or actually facing toward me this way. So we'll put that on, and that's that. And that cable we can take, stuff back out of the way. Okay, we have the Thunderbolt cable secured. Now we have the USB cable to plug in. Because of the nature of the beast, the best we can do is maybe route it back this way underneath. We're going to see if that will work. Okay, let's see if that card can route right through this area here. There's not a real convenient way to route that around. You can't route it under it because it's sitting right on top of that heatsink where 2 M.2 drives will be occupied. And it's notched to fit around this heatsink, but it's not notched for anything to go underneath it right there. So not much you can do about it. All we want to do is make sure we got the key right. So we will plug that in with the USB header on the motherboard. And that cable is keyed, so you don't have to worry about getting it on backwards. You can't get it in wrong. There's not much we can do about that cable. It is what it is. It's just not long enough to route, although it might. I'm not done yet. If this works, it's mighty close. That can go under there, but I'm not comfortable doing that. It mashes the cable, so that's going to have to stay on top. It may not look as pretty, but I'm more concerned about function than I am pretty. Don't like the idea of mashing that cable. Yeah, card goes in there better, so that's just going to have to hang. Nothing I can do about it. That works. We'll get that secured. Okay, well that took a little bit of tedious work, but the cables are all pretty neat. It's about as neat as we can get them. We've got the Thunderbolt card in, we've got the M.2 card back in, and we've got the cables routed. The thing that we spent the most time on probably was routing that USB cable. Routing the power cables were pretty easy, pretty simple. Routing the THB_C cable header connector, again we had to pull the M.2 card out, and while we were out we thought we could rearrange that USB cable, but the USB cable is at an odd length. It's not long enough and it's not short enough, but we routed around the end of the card, and I think we can live with that. So we've got that USB cable plugged in and routed around the card. So not bad, looks pretty good. That's about as neat as we can get. I'm sure somebody else can do neater. We're not interested in neat. Our primary concern is functionality. So we'll do a quick inventory. Everything's secured, everything's screwed down. We should be ready to power up. Now, to power this up, all we need to do is plug our stuff in. Now what we'll do when we get ready, we have 2 cables left over. Be sure and pull that film off the card. I'm doing that right now. Thought I forgot, didn't you? Almost. Got a little preoccupied. I got to thinking about these. Now, if we were to route video out of the video card into the Thunderbolt card, we'd need these 2 cables. So there they are. We've got everything internally connected, so this should do what we need it to do. Okay, everybody's good to go. We're set with that. So first thing we'll do is we'll get our keyboard and mouse plugged in. Plug it in keyboard and mouse right below the DAX. Gonna remember our video this time. And we're plugging directly into the video card. Plug in our power. Power supply is off. We'll go ahead and plug in our network. Now when we power up, as soon as we can see something on the BIOS on the computer screen, we'll kick over and take a look and see what's going on. So what we may do is watch overhead so you can see how this thing all powers up and see how it looks. See all the pretty lights. The smoke test. So we have the video card in, we've got the M.2 card in, and we've just installed the Thunderbolt 3 card. We've done an inventory, we got all of our cables internally connected, so we should be good to go. External, we got our keyboard and mouse, network, video this time, and we have the power supply. So I'll turn on the power supply, energized. Now we're ready to go. And we hear the BIOS, heard the beep. So we've done post. We should be able to get into the BIOS now. And we are. Okay, into the BIOS we go. This is pretty exciting. Alrighty, first thing we'll do is take a look and make sure, because we should have a new menu pop up for us. Let's go over to Settings, System Info, Boot. Yep. Okay, Boot sees our 4 M.2 drives, so the card's correctly configured. We'll go back to Settings. We should be able to go to I/O ports, and we should see a setting, and we do, right there. A new menu option. It's important to remember, last time we were in the BIOS, we didn't have this option because we didn't have that support. Once that signal is detected on that connector, if the BIOS support is there, we have this menu. Pretty cool. So far we're making progress. So we will go to that menu for Thunderbolt configuration, and it says Thunderbolt support enabled, memory allocation 128 megabytes, and prefetch memory allocation per port 32 megabytes. This is interesting. I've looked at this and studied this. In fact, I almost took a training class about Thunderbolt 3. It's been a while back until I heard about Thunderbolt 4 coming out. We'll get back to that later. And USB 2, USB 3, and USB 4 coming out. Yeah, we'll get back to that later. And anyway, the information that I expected to see here on the X299, I expected to see here on this one. We need to get BIOS support on the X399, or we haven't yet. I doubt we do. But this is not what I expected. So what we have is an option for enable or disable. Some of the stuff that had to be turned on to make this work, it's just off or on. And there's nothing to do. Plug it in. By default, it's enabled and it goes. Didn't expect that. I expected there to be some other stuff. Wow. So let's look at the menu again. I got to study that. I'm seeing this for the first time like you guys, so it's a mystery to me. We're discovering together. So I'm going to hit enter for Thunderbolt support enabled. So it's enable or disable. So I'll press escape there. I'll look at the second one, and wow, we can change the memory block size, allocation per port, and at the prefetch memory allocation per port, that too can be changed. So we're going to leave everything like it is, set by default. That's just amazing. What I'm curious about, I want to look at boot, and I'm curious if we have the option. I'm going to go down to number 9. It shows the 2 terabyte drive. I'm curious to see if we can change anything. Okay, it sees what it sees. What I was looking for to see if it might see the card. Now, theoretically, when Windows sees the controller, then it can see what's on the controller. Okay, we have nothing on the controller, but I was curious. Theoretically, when we have a device on this controller, we're going to go back into this menu and take a look and see if it'll show us that device connected, which means it could be bootable through Thunderbolt 3. I'm curious. We're gonna go through the process. Now, this next step is extremely important that all the drivers, the operating system is current, all the chipset drivers are current, get the latest from AMD, that for the motherboard, and also that your video card chipset drivers are all fully functional and at the latest version. This is a new platform, and we want everything to work. The menu is simplified from what I expected, which is great, but I'm just saying. Aha, there it is. Okay, right there. That's the second setting we need to check. Now, why don't they put all that stuff about Thunderbolt under one menu? So the Thunderbolt stuff is in 2 places. Okay, right here I'm going to press Enter. And for PCI Express Thunderbolt support, we're going to say Enable. Cool. This should give us device enumeration on the Thunderbolt at boot. That's why we're going to plug in a data device that we used before and see what we've got, because I am really curious about this. Cool. Okay, so that's the only thing we had to do. PCI Express Thunderbolt support, that is turned on. So back to bifurcation in slot 1 for the video card. Slot 2 has the M.2 card. Slot number 3. Now that is set for auto. That is the one that has the Thunderbolt card in it. So right now it's set for auto. We're going to leave it, and hopefully we're in good business. But if it doesn't like the card or we're not seeing things correctly, this is the one thing I would go back and change. Again, it's a beta BIOS, so we want to document the whole process. So 2 places, possibly 3. But 2 places we look to get this up and running. So pretty cool, pretty cool. All right, we'll leave that at auto. And then down here, Thunderbolt configuration, which is what we already saw. So I didn't notice Thunderbolt support there when I was looking at Thunderbolt configuration right there. I'm going to take a look right quick at USB. USB, that's all enabled. Okay, we should be good to go. Let's reboot. So we will go to save and exit, which would be boot override. That looks good. So we press F10. It shows the last thing we changed, which is PCI Express Thunderbolt support enabled. And we will reboot. So we have our driver CD for the motherboard, and we're in Windows. And setting up device. In the bottom right-hand corner down here, it said setting up device. I didn't get the screen over here quick enough for you to see it. There it is. We're setting up device. Oh, that's the keyboard. We'll give it a minute while it enumerates, because I changed where the keyboard and the mouse are plugged in. I thought what we were seeing had something to do with Thunderbolt. Base device is set up and ready to go. Okay, that's talking about the Thunderbolt card. Let's see what we've got. Go to notifications, which we don't need to do. I'm curious to see, okay, other devices. Base system device, driver is unavailable. Okay, that's why we need the driver on the CD. So now we're going to go take a look at that. So I need to stand this up so I can drop this in the CD. In fact, let's take a look at Device Manager right quick. So we'll go to Control Panel. We'll go to Device Manager. A lot of ways to get there. And that's what I wanted to see. Base device system. That's interesting. I expected to see some other errors down here, but they're not enumerating. So right now, that's the only error I see in Device Manager. I wanted to double check. Now, the first thing I like to do is take a look at this CD, and I want to see what's on the disk, because again, I'm looking for that README file. I don't want to just blindly install this. I just want to double check. So for now, we'll close all that good stuff. Let's look at the disk. This PC, we'll open the disk. Utility, other, for chipsets, new, maybe chipset. There we are. Thunderbolt and Thunderbolt DCH. Thunderbolt, setup, and release notes. Here we go. Okay. This document is the release notes for the Thunderbolt software version 17. That's what I wanted to know. 17.4.77.400. And it shows the chipsets it works for. The chipset we're using is the Titan Ridge, but this driver also works for the Alpine Ridge. 3 different settings. Actually 2 series. 3 series. A DSL 6540, a JHL, and this says a JHL Titan Ridge. Interesting. I'm kind of curious at this point because this is supposed to be a DSL 7540, and this documentation says this is a JHL 7540. I'm a little bit speechless. I'm not quite sure what to say. So the cards look the same, but apparently we have different chipsets. We're going to look at the driver on the other disk and look at a README for that. So this is a JHL 7540. Is that significant? If this works, yeah. And the other one doesn't, or sort of does, yeah, it's significant. Question is, how do you get your hands on one of these? Buy the motherboard. Ah, good idea. Okay, so let's see what else we can learn about this. So far we know this is a JHL 7540. Okay, changes, there's a hotfix, a race condition between software and firmware while entering RTD3 and the device is connected at the same time. Well, that wouldn't be very fun. Toast message on device. Connection changed to new Thunderbolt device has been connected. Click. The notification time has been extended to remain around 25 seconds at the minimum. Let's do a wrap with this. Make that a little easier to read according to the size of the document. In fact, I will, since we're zoomed in on this, so I'm not scrolling back and forth. Let's see if that makes that easier to read. Okay. Windows Update references RS3 and RS4, supports Windows 10 64-bit, supported controllers, and I know this is a 7540, but I thought it was a DSL 7540. That says it's a JHL. That's curious. Fixed a hotfix, toast message where a race condition occurs, fixed an MUP error, popped up with CVT 201. Notification time has been extended to remain 25 seconds. I don't see anything about keeping a device connected when you're doing the firmware update. So that was changed. Devices that can be used for boot or during pre-boot need to be pre-approved. Pre-boot ACL solution enables device pre-boot approval by maintaining an ACL or access control list in the firmware. Fixed race condition for supporting selective suspend state. That brings up an interesting point. This is a high-performance machine. Anything that's low performance, like power saving, that kind of stuff, turn that off because things may not come back the way you want. You'd have to reboot. So it's either all on or all off. I'm just saying, this is a high-performance machine, so keep it simple. That's the way I keep them running. Everything's always on. The only thing I'll let shut down might be the monitor, but for the Threadrippers, I keep those monitors on all the time. If I want them off, I turn them off. Added support for Windows 10 RS3, native PCI Express enumeration, a native express mode, and selective suspend. Added support to enable firmware update on host controller in USB only mode. Added support for firmware update on device based on TRDD, the JHL 7440. Sits and tray application. Yep. Add unified EFI capsule update reference code for host controller firmware. Optimized installer package. Toast notification improvement. Now based on the Action Center. We're looking back through some of the older versions because I'm looking to see what's going on. Enumeration. Added support for pre-boot ACL. Access control list. Okay, what we've learned right now is that there's support for the Thunderbolt 3 card in this machine to be able to boot from it. I've been curious about that. That's something else that we might do in a separate video. I'll try it and I'll let you guys know about if it works or not. That brings up some opportunities and some options. You know, it's funny, you've got to have, the hardware has to enumerate in the BIOS. Once you've got power on self-test and a device enumerates, then it hands off. Okay, the way a lot of that works when you plug something in that you're going to boot from is you have to have native chipset support. What do I mean by that? Take a USB controller. If the USB controller is part of the motherboard chipset, that's native support. So when it passes off to the operating system, it'll work. If you've got a separate controller like an AS Media controller that you do the USB 3, and if you want to boot from that, when Windows pops up, it says, I can't see the controller because that's not native chipset support. You're going to have to install a driver and tell me what controller it's on so I can see it. This says this will work, my understanding. And that's what I've been wanting to find out. So we should be able to install the driver without something connected. We should be good to go. And then we're going to bring it up and do a screen capture and see what our firmware is. And then we're going to power down, put in the other card, see what firmware it is. Take a look and see what it'll tell us. So interesting information. So hope you enjoyed that. Let's go ahead and do the driver. You know, for a lot of you that would install this without looking through the disk to look for the driver, I'm going to pull the disk out and put it back in, let the interface come up, and see if we can find the driver in that list. Because a lot of you are going to be doing it that way, not the way I just did it. I wanted to look. I wanted to dig. I wanted to find out some information before I went with the automatic process. But based on what I'm reading, we can go ahead. So I'm going to do that for you. Okay, what I'm going to do is back out of this, zoom out, and I'm going to close that document down, and I'm going to make a copy of it. I want those release notes. I'll put them in a folder later, but for right now, I'm going to put them on the desktop. And I will make note of the path where that information is at. I'll put that in a separate README document. Now, I've made note of the path, and I have a copy of the release notes. I'm going to close that and open the disk up. We're going to see if we can do an autoplay, but instead of opening the disk, Let's do it from Windows. So Windows flag E for Explorer. We'll click on this PC. We'll see our Blu-ray drive. We'll right click and we're going to say Open Autoplay. And we'll do the Run EXE. Yes, be the same thing as pulling the disk out and putting it back in. AMD TRX40 series version 10B18.1002.1. So if anybody's wondering what version driver disk we've got, right there it is. So we're looking for a driver, and this is drivers and software. So let's see what we have. AMD chipset, Realtek, Intel, Intel Wi-Fi, Intel Bluetooth, Intel Thunderbolt. There it is, DCH. So I want to uncheck everything. Those are all gray. So the Intel Thunderbolt software DCH, we were not looking under the DCH driver. We were looking under just Thunderbolt. So that's the one we'll install. And you'll notice it's not grayed out. So we'll just click install. That's all we need. So let's run this. Now it's doing whatever it's doing. I don't see any action. Right there it is. Thunderbolt Control Center in the bottom right just got installed. Check it out. We can pin to start or launch. We're going to pin it to the start. And on the menu on the right, one new notification which says the same thing. Thunderbolt controller just got installed. Check it out. So I'm going to launch it, and that looked completely different on the X399 when we did it. So they've changed the way the driver works. I need to go back and revisit that on the X399 now. We might have better luck. Right now we got BIOS support, and it was pretty simple. Remember, we're in slot 1 of the 2 8-lane slots. We can try the bottom slot in a few minutes and see what happens. I don't expect it to work, but we're going to try it. And we still have the other card to install. So I'm going to go here to the menu, Approved Devices, Attached Devices, Manage Approved Devices, and About. It shows us the application version, the controller driver version, the Thunderbolt controller, and we are Thunderbolt generation, Thunderbolt 3, 15EB, 2 ports. Our security level is User Authentication SL1, and the NVM firmware vision, which is the non-volatile memory, 43.0. That's kind of a big deal. That's what I want to know. So we'll do a screen capture of this and save it, plug in the other card, and see what happens. But before we do, we got to finish the process. We're going to connect the device to this. So screen capture, Windows flag print screen. Another little tidbit of information you might not know about, but when you set up a new machine, when you press print screen's nothing happening. It's on the clipboard. You put it somewhere. But when you press the Windows flag plus print screen, Windows automatically creates a folder and puts that image in that folder and names them consecutively every time you do that. So then when you bring up Windows Flag E, it'll be in a list. Let me show you. So Windows Flag E for Explorer, and if you look right here where it says right there, screenshot, that is the image that I just captured. And it's under this PC, picture screenshots. That's a default behavior. If you didn't know it, you learned something new. Cool, huh? So if we take a look at that image, that's our screen capture, and that's what we wanted. That's important information. So Alt F4 to close that. Windows flag, we'll get that minimized. We've got the driver installed. Now what I want to do, and we'll close this interface. We got what we needed. We'll close that down as well. What I'm going to look over here is into the messaging on the bottom right. There should be, or there used to be, a little menu that would pop up, and I don't see it. So they've changed that behavior. And for those of you that are wondering what a decimator is, the decimator is part of the magic how when we come out of HDMI, we go into a decimator. HDMI, it goes through this multi-format converter, converts it to SDI, send it to the video switch. It's part of the magic. So when you see a decimator up there, that's what's going on. So as we look at this, we've got Bluetooth, NVIDIA, Windows Security, and Safely Remove Hardware, which gives us the internal data drive. I think that's a 4 terabyte, a 6 terabyte, and the Blu-ray. I'm looking to check all the bases because once we get something hooked up on this external drive through Thunderbolt, it'll show up in this list where we can eject the device. So I just want to check all the bases. Let's connect something. Now this device is not really unboxing. We've used it before, but we haven't used it lately. We were remodeling. But the intention and the goal was, this is a rack mount device. We're going to put this in a rack, which brings up another point. We're going to take a computer and put it in a rack. We need Thunderbolt support because the goal is to have a computer with Thunderbolt support, to have this rack mounted so that we can take the discs that we pull out of our video rack. That was one of the things we've been working on for quite some time that we expected with the X399. The problem is, can we get a TRX40 motherboard in a rack mount case? That's another video that we'll talk about later. So we're going to get this out of the box and take a look at it. This is the accessory box. Only thing that's important in here is there's some fasteners to rack mount this. All we're going to do is get this out, plug it in, hook it up. We got a power cable, we got a wall wart for it for the power cable, and we have the device itself. This is not a consumer product. This is more of a professional product. But this is what we use and we're going to use for the work we were doing. What we may have to do is a separate video on this because it's an amazing piece of equipment. Just like on the box, the BlackJet Cinema Dock allows us to have two SSDs here. We have two modules that are replaceable, CFast and an XD card here, XQD actually. And over here, what we use is the SD and the micro SD. So we use the modules on each end. The one in the middle we don't use, and I don't know that we will be using. There was a camera we were looking at one time that would be. Because these modules can be removed and replaced, we could have another SSD here. We could have another module with compact flash and an SD card reader. Modules to replace are about $100. So all we have to have on the back on the business end, let's turn this around and take a look at it. So on the back we have a power tap, two Thunderbolt 3 ports, but the cable that comes with this is extremely short. Now in a rack, that's the perfect length. For a computer, it's terribly short, but for this, it's going to do what we need to. Okay, so what we need to do is we will plug this into the Thunderbolt card. We should see something on the screen, and the device should enumerate. We'll plug one port into the Thunderbolt 3, and this is an actual Thunderbolt 3 cable. We'll get our power plugged in to our device. Power cable's plenty long that comes with this, plenty long. And this power cable has a pull on it so that it won't pull out accidentally. So it has a top and a bottom to it, and it locks in once it's in. So power is connected. We have Thunderbolt 3 on the card. We'll now plug in Thunderbolt to this device. Let's see if it enumerates. Yes, we do. New Thunderbolt device has been connected. Click here to approve the device. So we'll click, and there we have it. And it shows the ATEC Flash Technology BlackJet Cinema Dock. And I can select OK. It shows I'm on port 2, or I can say Do Not Connect. And it says here, selecting Do Not Connect will prevent that device and all devices further down the chain from being used on the system. Remember, daisy chain. Whatever's on there, we can hook some more devices down the line. So this is the first and the simplest device. Now, we have device connectivity, which is great. It works a lot better than it did on the X399 chipset. This is like it should be. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to stick a memory card in there and see what we see on the computer. Now, the path I've had to go with the way I do this on the SneakerNet is the SSDs come out of the recorder when they're finished. I put them in this removable dock. That's step one. I then take this removable dock and plug that into the removable rack. So you can see that's like step one, step two to get the stuff out. This device was supposed to eliminate this step where either the data comes directly here into the computer one step, or it'll come directly from the SSD recorder into the computer. And that would even eliminate this. The problem, this is Thunderbolt 3. That device is Thunderbolt 2. It's amazing technology, but it's Thunderbolt 2. Now, on the X399 chipset, we had support, native chipset support. We had native support for Thunderbolt 3, but no legacy support. What does that mean? Legacy is Thunderbolt 1 and Thunderbolt 2. What's the difference in the three? One, device connectivity, which is the difference in speeds of the three, and also the cable that you plug in. It's a little bit confusing. That was our simple solution. So I've got this now on the taskbar. It wasn't there, so what I did is went to Start, scroll down to Thunderbolt Control Center. I did a right click, More, and I said Pin to the taskbar. So now I have it on the taskbar right here, Thunderbolt Control Center. So when I click on it, I've now got, interesting, it says not connected. So power mode, self-power, status not connected. So that's why it's not seeing the disk. So I'm going to unplug the cable. It goes away. I'm going to plug it back in, this time into port 1, and it comes back, and I'm going to say OK. Now right now it says do not connect, so I'm going to change that, and that was my problem. I left the default do not connect, so I'm going to say always connect. Now I'm going to say OK. And by doing so, it's interesting how Thunderbolt 3 works now on the Threadripper 3 versus the Threadripper 2, on the TRX40 versus the X399. So we're going to go back and revisit that on the X399 now that we have something that we have a baseline for, see if we can get that working. Once this is working 100% functional, then we're going to do the tinkering install. Ah, wow. Yeah, it sees the drive. The device just popped up. That's what's on the disk. That is exceptional. Now what I need to do, because I believe those are MOV files, Windows is going to try to play them natively. So I need to go out to Ninite, and I will pull down VLC and use that to play back my media with. Now we should be able to see, it says USB device not recognized, malfunctioning. Wonder what that might be. Try reconnecting the device. Curious, USB device not recognized. Well, that's annoying. That could be this. I'm not 100% certain. USB device not recognized. Okay, it finally went away. So let's see if it sees the drives. Yep, there it is. The SanDisk SSD. That's what's in there. It's about a, there it is, 480 gigs. That's the disk we use to record video for the meeting. I have one that's that one 480, which I use most of the time. I have another one, I think the other one's like 500. Pretty much the same. One's, I think they're both SanDisk, just different generations. So all I needed to do is approve the device. I'm giddy. So VLC is still not our preferred application, even though it's installed. So I'm going to right click on the media, and I'm going to say, I can't do send to, I've got to do open with VLC. So I'm going to say choose another app. Now I'll select VLC and I'll say always. So it'll automatically set it. Bingo. And that is what's on that file. F11 Control H. So that's the video we recorded from one of the other meetings. In fact, that's the video we recorded from the last meeting that's on that disk. That's now playing off this disk. And I have that connected. Cool. So Control H, F11, enough of him. So we have media. We'll click on this PC. We see the disk. That's it, disk fat. So that's doing a simple install of Thunderbolt 3. I can't tell you guys how ecstatic I am over this. My mind's spinning right now. We labored over this so much trying to get this working on the X399, and we had it working sorta. Right now, though, I am stoked that this is working. This is something we've been wanting for a long time. Remember, there's 14 TRX40 motherboards. Only one has support for this Titan Ridge Thunderbolt 3. Now, if somebody want to ask, there's Titan Ridge. There have been, I think, three Alpine cards. We have one of the Alpine cards. Now, the question is, can we put this card in the other slot and will it work? I don't think so. Based on some information I saw with folks that have tried this on the Gigabyte forums. But right now, this works. Like they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we're still testing. So that's the Thunderbolt 3 with a simple installation. All we did was data. We did not route video through it. We're not routing power through it, even though we have power connected to it. We didn't need to have power connected. I just wanted all the cables internally connected, so that's over with. And the USB 2 cable, it helps with the device enumeration, pulling stuff in and out. Wow, my head's spinning. So if we go over here to the computer, and we could do on the bottom right-hand corner, click, right-click, and we could eject that disk, and that would have the same effect of removing it. And it's been removed from Explorer, and I did not go look at it in Device Manager, but it automatically popped up. And of course, there's our other drives that are on the M.2 card, all 4 NVMe drives. Now to get that back, all I have to do is pull this out, put it back in, and it should enumerate. So let's go to the screen. So I'll plug it back into the same slot, and let's see if we enumerate. We did, pretty fast. Part of that's the cache. The first time enumeration, it took a little while because it had to read all that stuff into memory, but the second time it just popped right up. Now that is beautiful. That is brilliant. That's what we needed. Wow. So if you need a reason to build a TRX40, that alone is worth it. Bypass the X399. We have one motherboard on the X399 that we did with Gigabyte, and we don't have full BIOS support. But let's try the next step and see what we get, because I'm stoked. Let's go into the BIOS, take a look at this, and see how it sees the device. I know it will see it, which means it could boot from it, but I just want to double check. Let's go do that. So we need to close all that, and we will reboot the computer, and we're going to go into the BIOS. So once we get into the BIOS, we'll see how it sees the device. Everything is still connected. The media is still there with data on it. So this is Thunderbolt 3. And we have to have a PCI Express 3.0 4-lane slot. Now, as far as throughput, how do you get 40 gigabit over PCI Express that's only 30 gigabit? So that's called marketing. That's Intel. Okay, we had USB 2. We went to USB 3. Then we went to USB-C. And we have USB 3 ports on the front of this case. And we have USB-C on the motherboard as well as in a drive bay device once we enable that feature. Going down the road, Thunderbolt has gone 1, 2, and 3. The next thing I want to see is, because we have native support for Thunderbolt 3, will we have legacy support, which means Thunderbolt 1 and 2. I'm going to connect the data drive, and I'll do that later separately, and I'll tell you about it. But with Thunderbolt 3, the next thing coming out was supposed to be USB 4. And Intel turned Thunderbolt 3 over to USB 4. And then Intel turns around and says, oh, then we're going to come out with Thunderbolt 4. So it's always kind of like who's on first, or what technology you want to embrace. You got to think about what you're doing and where you want to go. And for us, and what we're going to do, we have 3 audio interfaces. One is USB, straight USB. The other 2 are Thunderbolt 3. And we'll do those Thunderbolt 3 audio interfaces on this computer separate videos, but at different times, so I hope you'll watch for them. And remember, this is a Blackjet Cinema Dock card reader. It's a pretty cool piece of equipment, but it's more of a professional type piece of equipment. This is the kind of thing I would have talked about behind the scene, but it's relevant for what we're doing here, especially for a content creator. If you're creating content and you've got to move media, I think this is a handy device. Everything we do is either on SSDs or it's on micro SD, like if you got the GoPros, or a regular XD card. All of our Canons use SD cards. Okay, now we're going back in the BIOS. We want to see, not only do we see this device connected, this dock, but we want to see if we see that drive. So let's take a look. Let's look at boot. Wow, yes we do. There's the device, and if you'll notice, it sees all the ports. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, it sees 5 of these. So it sees 1 and 2, 3, 4, and it must see all these as 1. So the fact that we see this device and we see that SanDisk, that tells me we can boot from this device. That's kind of wicked. Let's try installation number 2.